it do, guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Indiana Jones. Today we got a video about the Antichrist being revealed to the world. Let's check it out.
In the second edition of the Antichrist in Cup of Tea. Here it is, July 28th, at the Commonwealth Games, the 22nd Commonwealth Games for 2022. You have these every few years. They've been going on the whole time. The Queen Elizabeth II was queen. It's the largest set of international games in the world after the Olympics. And this year they had 72 nations and territories participating. Roughly, they estimate almost a third of the world's population potentially watching. Okay, the whole British Commonwealth. At this event, Prince Charles opened it in lieu of the Queen on her behalf. He oversaw the whole thing. He was there in person at the Alexander Stadium in Birmingham, England. Okay. At that event, a giant Molech bull, 10 meters in height, was rolled out into the center of the stadium to be worshiped and to face a large, recreated, rebuilt, right there in front of everybody, mock Tower of Babel with shards in it. And it begins with a star exploding in our solar system. That's how they introduced this. A lot of CGI initially. They portray a star outside our solar system, or maybe deep in our solar system, blowing up past Saturn. And it explodes, a bright star like Lucifer. That's what it is, exploding. And its shards fly through our solar system, and they reach Earth. And they land in all the nations of the Commonwealth. And these 72 quote-unquote dreamers, New Agers, find these shards outside their homes. They retrieve them. The first person to do so is named Stella. She picks it up. It's lit. It's brightly lit. It's like a large quartz crystal that's bright white, lit as bright white, like an interior light, as it were, bright white. She picks this thing up and she prays to it, whispers to it and prays to it. Then she takes us back to her home. All these others, these 72 dreamers, there's 72 of them total, including her, pick their shards up and they take them to their homes. As soon as they do, there are anti-gravity effects in their homes. Things start to float in the air, and then their homes are lifted up off the ground with these people in them, and they float across the Commonwealth from other nations and across the UK, across seas and oceans and lakes and forests and so forth, to Birmingham, England, to be over the stadium. All these homes floating over the stadium, and then they land. And the dreamers exit them in front of the audience, and they have the shards in hand. The bull then comes onto the stadium, pulled by slavish women on chains. The bull, they portray this, rebels and detaches from the chains. And these female slaves who've been driven by somebody who's kind of like a Roman, a demon, whatever, because he doesn't quite look like a Roman, are freed, right? So now the bull and these women are freed, and they pretend they're afraid of each other. And the bull goes on to the center of the stadium, and these quote-unquote dreamers, these New Agers, encircle the thing. But initially, before they do that, Stella comes with her crystal. She and 5 others, there are 6 of them, 6 of the dreamers, apart from these slavish women, who are behind now on the bull to either side of it as it's moving, kind of charging actually, into the center of the stadium.
The video that I made about that man sneaking into the Bohemian Grove, that had to do with Molech, and here we are talking about Molech again.
Okay, from the track from just outside where it's entered, now detached from its chain, no longer restrained. Okay. Charges into the center of the stadium. Stella, wanting to appease this thing so that they're not killed by this Molech idol, goes with this New Age crystal, approaches it slowly with these 5 other dreamers. She's got the crystal in her left hand, and then she puts her hand up to the nose of the bull, and it bows down so that she can touch its nose with the crystal in her hand. She's the only one holding her crystal at that point. And the bull is, at least at that moment, appeased. And there's a whole backstory to this, and they say things, they announce things to the audience, about peace, love, friendship, yada, yada, conflict resolves, slaves freed, all this kind of stuff. And as this is happening, the slavish, and there are multiple stages to this, so I'm going to be skipping over some things, but this bowl kind of calms down. It's facing the Tower of Babel this whole time. And at times there are flames like the towers, like the flames of hell all over this Tower of Babel, okay? And it's facing this thing. The bull is. They encircle it multiple times, and they literally worship it. They've all got their crystals in hand. They bow down to this thing. And then later, Stella gets atop it and rides it as the woman riding the beast. And there are then 71 dreamers encircling it. And they're bowing down to this thing, worshiping it, and literally doing a New Age worship ceremony with their crystals before this thing, and inviting the whole Commonwealth to join them in this worship. And who's overseeing all of this? Prince Charles. And then the woman's riding the beast, right? And as we get toward the end of the ceremony, and there are a bunch of songs, by the way, that are accommodating this with significant lyrics, okay? And I won't go into that, but it's all documented in the book. At the end,
Okay,
as it's getting dark.
Which book is this?
This is going to be in the second edition of the Antichrist, a Cup of Tea. One reason it's a little bit delayed is I have to get this in there. It's too critical. Okay? Right there at the end, the bull is rearing back. So it's rising up on its front feet. Okay? And it's encircled by the flags of all these nations, the 72. They've literally placed their flags at the base of this thing. So not just worshiping it with their crystals and all the rest, and not just being ridden by Stella, the woman riding the beast. Now the tower is rising again before this beast. It's been built. And all the nations, by the way, their names have gone across this tower already, at this point been displayed on its surface. At the top of this tower, I told you those shards came down earlier from the heavens.
The crazy thing is that Moses already got rid of this bull in the Old Testament when he threw down the 10 Commandments on it. And here we are again, repeating history.
This blown up Luciferian star, representing the devil, reaching the earth, falling to the earth. The devil falling to the earth, okay? And being taken up by these New Agers. So they all approach, they leave the bull now, but the flags are at the base of the bull, showing the nations are all worshiping around this bull, the 71. And I'm going to come back to the number 71. It's extremely significant. But at any rate, they all come to the base of this tower with their shards in hand, and they stick them into the side of the tower, and they ascend visibly through the tower. And as they get toward the top of the tower, they form this ball, the original star that blew up, reconstituted, and then it rises above the tower, and you get this huge disco-like ball atop the tower that's lit up very brightly, and a beam of light goes between that ball and the chest of the bull. Now, it's nighttime at this point in Alexander Stadium, an open-air stadium, so you can see these lights, but they're portraying the rebuilding of the Tower of Babel in our day, with Lucifer being over it, being worshipped by all the nations of the world. And why do I say all? I said that the 72 dreamers were for the 72. They're for the 72 nations and territories of the British Commonwealth, right? Stella being the 72nd, she's riding the bull. Why 71 worshiping around the bull? Okay, how does that represent all the nations? Well, here's the deal. At the Feast of Tabernacles every year, Israel would sacrifice 70 bulls, not 71, 70. And Israel's rabbis historically understood that to represent the nations that came out of the scattering from the Tower of Babel. So they took those 70 to represent the nations of the world. And the way Christians and often the rabbinic community have interpreted those 70 bulls that were sacrificed, they would say, well, we have our God and we worship him and we do sacrifices on behalf of Israel. This is how it would be interpreted, right? So these 70 are for the nations. And oftentimes Christians look at that and they think this is a sacrifice on behalf of the nations, so that maybe their sins would be forgiven. The ones who don't worship the God of Israel at the Feast of Tabernacles each year, it was never that. That is not what it ever in history represented. So I'm going to come back to what it did represent in a moment. It did represent the 70 nations. That's correct. But the reason there were 71 around the base of this bowl is because Israel was included. You see, the nation of Israel came after the 70 at the Tower of Babel, right?
Interesting.
So now they're saying, oh, Israel, by the way, you're not going to worship your God anymore. You're going to worship Lucifer with us. So there are 71 instead of 70 at the base of this bowl, led by the woman riding the beast, representing, if you want, the harlot church under the Antichrist, okay? Well, what were the sacrifices really about? at Tabernacles, the 70 bowls? Was it for the sins of the nations? I'm going to tell you no. It was their death and destruction, their crushing by the Messiah at Armageddon. That's what it really represented. When God, our God, sacrifices the nations like brute beasts, man without understanding is like the beasts that perish. That is what Scripture tells us multiple times. Those nations that did not worship God, that were at the base of the Tower of Babel historically, were not worshipers of the real God. They were engaging in paganism.
So that just goes to show that everybody don't even know what's going on. To all the nations that don't understand. Like, you're clueless, you need to do your research about all of this. Whether you believe it's a myth or not. Like, this is your soul we're talking about. That's insane.
And God scattered them to the nations. He brought a nation separate from them, a new nation, Israel, the 71, the 71st, okay? So we can look in Revelation 19, in Ezekiel 39. We can see that when the Lord is done with Armageddon, that the birds of prey come down to eat the flesh of the slain. Like beasts, right? The flesh is slain, like man without understanding, sacrificed like beasts. How do we know that the world is like beasts in that context to God? In Acts chapter 10 through 15, in chapter 10, Peter was shown a scroll. He was atop a house, a rooftop. A scroll rolled down from the heavens before him. And in it were beasts of all kinds, creatures, crawly things, right?
Right.
Different kinds of life. And 3 times God said to Peter, "Arise, slay and eat." And 3 times Peter refused. He rebuked God. He said, "Not so, Lord." Almost in an angry tone. "Not so, Lord. Nothing common or unclean has ever entered my mouth or passed my lips," right? And the 3rd time, and each time God said to Peter, what God calls clean, do not call what God, I forget the exact wording, but what God sanctifies basically don't call common or unclean. That's essentially what he says to Peter each time. And at that moment, the scroll disappears. But the whole point is these nations that Peter saw were represented as unclean beasts. And most of the nations of the world, many of them, even to this day, have unclean animals, what would biblically be considered unclean to eat, as their symbols.
Oh, interesting.
So when these bulls were sacrificed, on behalf of the nations, in this case, they were symbolizing the Molech worshipers being killed by Christ at Armageddon. Okay? Man without understanding, sacrifice like the beasts, like beasts. And that's what we have. We have an attempt under Prince Charles, now King Charles III, to flip all that on its head and to get modern mankind to worship the devil with this ancient Molech imagery, to invite mankind to do that and to suggest that Israel is going to be a part of it. That was July 28th this year at the opening of the Commonwealth Games. So for that to happen.
Crazy thing about that day is that it's my birthday, guys. Like, that is spooky.
Happen. And then Charles to become King Charles. Right after that, King Charles III.
Wow, the timing.
It's incredibly significant.
Yeah, the timing is amazing.
Oh, and I'm going to wrap it up with one other point, which makes all of this that's very significant even more so. If you could imagine that. So, and I pointed this out, by the way, in the first edition of the Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. It's also been in drafts of my Messiah History in the Tribulation Period since the 1980s, some of which I circulated about 30 copies to earlier viewers in the early 1990s, okay? Before, a long time before the Antichrist and Cup of Tea was published. So I'm not just saying this now. I've said this from the beginning. There was never anything such as a revived Roman Empire. Doesn't exist, never existed, never will. That's a misunderstanding of Scripture. What there is instead is a revived Babylonian Empire.
Interesting.
So you'll recall Nebuchadnezzar's statue, right? Starts out with a gold head, and then it leads to the 10 toes, which are the final form of the Roman Empire, right? Babylonia was destroyed historically, went away, right? But at the end of the tribulation week, what city gets destroyed? Mystery Babylon. That is the city that rules over the kings of the earth, right? That is the city destroyed right before Armageddon in Revelation 19. Mystery Babylon. That is the city that rules over the kings of the earth under the Antichrist. Right?
And that was why God destroyed them. You know, they were always trying to build towers to go into the heavens. I see why God was upset with them. And here we are again, just like I said before, repeating history.
So what does that mean? There's a revived Babylonian empire. And the final form of the Roman Empire, where these 10 toes, these 10 kings actually come on the scene, where the global government is constituted, that is nothing less than the revived Babylonian Empire that has come out of the Roman Empire. It's the final form of the Roman Empire, but it's also a revived Babylonian Empire for them to then go now, right before he becomes king. And particularly if we're already in the tribulation week, approaching the Great Tribulation, which if we are already in the tribulation week, that would mean the Great Tribulation will start less than 2 years from now. Okay?
Which is then 3.5 years.
Right. 3.5 years from the start of the 7 years, if we're in the tribulation week. And I don't know if we are yet. But regardless, for it to be at this point in history before he becomes king, to now say, we're reconstituting the Tower of Babel. We're putting Lucifer as the all-seeing eye, the king, over this whole thing. And we and you are to worship through Molech, this bull idol. And here's the other clincher. Moses came down off Mount Sinai with the initial set of tablets to find Israel had reconstituted that bull, the golden calf. It's the same thing. It was the Aphis bull of Egypt, the same thing as Molech. For Molech and Baal, like Ra and Aphis for Egypt.
Like I said before.
Same thing. Moses comes down off Mount Sinai with God's commandments and finds Israel worshiping this thing.
Right.
Throws down these commandments and judgment follows, right? Disgusted with Israel. It's so serious that God is ready to annihilate Israel from the face of the planet and make a new nation out of Moses, right? And Moses intercedes and says, no, Lord, take my life too, if you're going to do this. Otherwise, why have you brought this people out of Egypt only to have your name, mocked, spoken against among the nations because you brought them out and couldn't bring them, all the way to the promised land. You had to kill them in the wilderness because they were so wicked, right? You couldn't deliver, in other words. If you're going to do that, kill me too. So Moses interceded in the ultimate way before God. And so God changed his mind and judged the nation of Israel, right? And ultimately gave new 10 commandments. Okay, so here Moses was a type of Christ, right? So for the moment here, we're going to put Moses in the place of Christ. Moses was a type of Christ. There's a prophet like him who would arise in Israel. That's the Messiah, right? Okay. So the Antichrist is a counterfeit of Christ. Therefore, he's also a counterfeit of Moses, right?
Right.
So here's Prince Charles. At the beginning of this event, the bull hasn't been brought out yet, not unveiled. The bull is brought out. Then these runners that have traveled, these athletes that have traveled through all the nations the prior year, bring this baton, which is shaped like a torch, to Prince Charles. And this is after all this stuff has happened around this bull. And Prince Charles has been overseeing the whole thing. They bring this torch and they open the top of the torch and a little scroll is pulled out of the torch. And the lady who's over the Commonwealth Games unscrolls it, hands it to Prince Charles, and he reads it as a message from his mother to bless the event. This is like the 10 Commandments. This is the counterfeit in this case. Moses coming off the mountain, Prince Charles overseeing this event. Moses seeing Israel worshiping the golden calf and being furious, and casting down the 10 Commandments. Prince Charles seeing the nations worshiping the Molech bull. Not being furious, saying, oh, hey, let me bless this from the queen. And right after that is when the bull raises up on its heel. The tower is fully raised. The all-seeing eye of Lucifer is reconstituted over the thing. And the beam of light goes between the bull's chest and that ball over the tower, the all-seeing eye. Prince Charles oversaw that whole thing. It's like saying, now you can worship the devil. And we'll achieve our aim of finally building the Tower of Babel and putting Lucifer as our God, our king.
That's wild, guys. If y'all don't know about the story of Babylon, anything like that, y'all need to read y'all's Bible, and y'all need to look at y'all's history. If y'all enjoyed this video, man, please follow on all accounts. And until then, it's your boy Indiana Jones with another discovery.